Hey y'all, new book, Confronting Christianity by Mclaughlin. The subtitle is 12 Hard Questions for the World's Largest Religion. All right, we're going to jump in, starting with the introduction. Ready? Let's go. All right, guys, so she starts off with talking about John Lennon and his dream of no religion, no heaven, no hell, no countries, no possessions. And it's supposed to be something about what we can imagine that would bring us together. And she kind of brings this out with North Korea's leader who tried no religion, and yet they still found much to kill and die for. And then she talks and contrasts that with Dr. Martin Luther King, who says one day in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. And one day, every valley shall be exalted, every hill and mountain shall be made low. The places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight. And the glory of the Lord shall be revealed. And that's Isaiah 44. So as she's contrasting those, she says, who was right? So then she goes on to talk about how there's this secularization theory where as the world became more educated and more advanced, more scientific, religious belief would retreat. And was that what happened? No, she says it failed. In Western Europe and North America, the proportion of people identifying as religious has certainly shrunk, but on the global level, we've become an increasingly religious world. And she says that numbers don't tell the whole story, but by 2060, the latest projection is Christianity will still be the largest global belief system. And then she goes on to give some numbers that suggest a projection, and there's studies down there to research this, but about how most of the world's major religions are going to be growing. And in fact, by 2060, the proportion of humanity identifying as atheist, agnostics, or none will have declined from 16% to 13%. So they will decline. The world will get more religious is what the projections show. So again, this secularization hypothesis comes to a failure. So what's happening? Well, she says the link between theology and biology is really what's driving it. Muslims, Christians, Hindus, and Jews outbreed the non-religious. So we are a very fruitful group, I guess, if you could say it that way. She also goes to show that the presumed link between education and secularization is weak. While there are gaps are closing for the younger generation, Jews and Christians are still the most educated groups, with the smallest educational gap between men and women. And that's with Christians. All right, so in the U.S., while normally religious people are more likely to declare themselves non-religious if they are more educated, professing Christians with higher levels of education appeared to be just as religious as those with less schooling. So the choice is obviously coming from your will, your heart, not necessarily your education level, as the secularization hypothesis would have us think. So again, 40% of Americans raised non-religious become religious, is what a recent study finds. And as adults, while only 20% of those raised Protestant switch. So she says, if that trend continues, my secular friends are twice as likely to raise children who become Christians as I am to raise children who become non-religious. So, and she goes to say, this isn't the religious kind of people that put coexist bumper stickers in their car, but it's actually full-blooded evangelical Christians. So then she goes to show something pretty shocking, that in China, which is an officially non-religious nation, China could have, and is supposed to have, as a study shows, that by 2030, China could have more Christians than the U.S., and that could be a majority Christian country by 2050. And this is going to play into a later point that she makes in a different chapter. So then she goes on to say, much academic discourse rests on the assumption that religion is withering under the scorching heat of modernization. But that framework has crumbled, and therefore we can see Lenin's dream was a fantasy. And it's a fantasy fueled by white Western bias and grounded on the assumption that the world would follow where Western Europe led. And she'll go to point out later, diversity really is at the heart of Christianity. It's not this white majority population that Western thinkers would like you to, especially liberal thinkers would like you to think. So the question ends up becoming, is it Christianity or Islam that's going to be the majority religion in the coming years? And she says that, we look at extremism and violence, the stifling of free thought, subjugation of women in some parts of the world, and the resurgence of traditionalist Islam has borne this unappealing fruit. But for many raised in the secularizing West, biblical Christianity also triggers moral and intellectual objections. What about science, suffering, and sexuality? What about the Crusades? How can you say there's one true faith? How can you take the Bible literally? Doesn't the Bible just justify slavery? How could a loving God send people to hell? And then she goes on to say that if you want to explore these topics and issues, this book is for you. And she's going to provide tons of study and research and numbers and data and theology to go into that. And I like the statement she makes at the bottom here. Christianity represents our tightest grasp on truth and our best hope for the world. So towards the end, this last little section, she says, often when we observe from a distance, we misinterpret. Look up at the night sky and you will see much darkness, but train a telescope on the blackest patch and a million galaxies explode into view. John Lennon dreamed of a religion-free world where there would be nothing to kill or die for. And again, we see that just doesn't happen in a no-religious world. There still ends up being other things that people find to kill and die for. Continuing on, staring into the dark night of segregation, Martin Luther King preached an antithetical message that there are some things so dear, some things so precious, some things so eternally true that they are worth dying for. And I submit to you that if a man has not discovered something that he will die for, he isn't fit to live. All right, so this is a pretty cool introduction to this book, and I hope to dive into the book more into the following chapters.